Hello, you're watching BBC World News. I'm Naga Manchetti. Here are the headlines. The President of Ukraine is to convene a special cross-party commission to try to resolve weeks of political crisis. The announcement follows a day of clashes in Kiev as riot police confronted anti-government protesters. One of Syria's main opposition groups says it's pulling out of peace talks unless the UN retracts its invitation to Iran. The United States says Iran shouldn't attend unless it supports the establishment of a transitional government. The EU and the United States will suspend some of their sanctions on Iran in a few hours if a UN nuclear watchdog confirms it's reduced its uranium enrichment. The move is part of a deal to curb Tehran's nuclear program. And at least 4 people have been killed in Pakistan by a suicide bomber in the city of Rawalpindi near Islamabad. The blast hit a crowded market near the Army's national headquarters, one of the most secure areas of the city. Those are the latest headlines from BBC World News. Now, for the latest financial news with Sally.
China's economic growth rate falls to a still impressive 7.7%, but that is a rate most other countries can only dream about. And the gender gap is still alive and well. New research shows female graduates ask for much lower starting salaries than their male colleagues. Hello and welcome you with World Business Report. I'm Sally Bundock. Also in the programme, some bad news from Deutsche Bank as it's hit with some costly fines. But first of all eyes are on the world's second biggest economy today. Economic growth in China was at its slowest for 14 years in 2013, according to the latest figures out today. Its gross domestic product expanded 7.7%. And if you compare that to the previous years, that's the slowest pace since 1999. However, it is better than the government target of 7.5%. China needs a high level of growth to provide the new jobs and prosperity it so desperately needs. And so the focus now is on economic reform, and one place where that's meant to be on display is in the new free trade zone, which opened in Shanghai 4 months ago. Here's our correspondent, John Sudworth.
So far, not much appears to have happened. The old bonded warehouses and factories are still here, just as they were 4 months ago, when this plot of land was formally opened as part of Shanghai's new free trade zone. Behind the scenes, though, there's been a flurry of activity. More than 40 business consultancies like this one have been set up to help thousands of interested companies register inside the zone. Rents have more than doubled, and there's a sense of idealism and adventure. China is entering a new era with new leadership, this consultant tells me. The free trade zone could be a connecting point between China and the world, and as a young man, he says, "My dream is based on my country's dream. I hope to achieve something here." On the edge of the free trade zone, there's a reminder of China's existing model of growth, based on energy-intensive, heavy industry. The zone is supposed to be all about moving to a new model, creating the conditions to encourage the financial and service sector companies that are vital to a consumer economy. But despite the high hopes, 4 months after the signboards went up, some are beginning to wonder if it will have anything like as significant an impact on growth as once hoped. Policymakers appear to be moving cautiously, and some of the bolder promised measures, like full currency convertibility and interest rate liberalisation, remain aspirational rather than reality. There is certainly no shortage of pioneering companies hoping to get themselves a foothold. But whether this really is the gateway to China's future, the next big leap forward in economic reform, well, there is simply not yet enough detail to judge. John Sudworth, BBC News, Shanghai.
And to talk some more about this, let's speak to David Wilder, who's from Market News International. He's based in Beijing. And before we get going, I just want to make you aware of the fact there is quite a delay between my speaking and David hearing what I'm saying. So just bear with us as we continue. So David, just to start with, give us your take on this figure we've had today, 7.7% growth for 2013. It's not a good figure, but it's not also a very bad one either, is it?
Well, the good news, as you say, is it's above last year's target of 7.5%, just about. It reflects slowing investment and slowing output, but the bigger problem, I think, is that investment is actually making up a bigger proportion of growth than it has been since 2009 and before that since 2003. That reflects the idea that the government has resorted in the middle of last year to the kind of a sort of moderate version of the stimulus that we've been used to seeing as growth neared that 7.5% target. But overall, it reflects a general slowing in economic growth and the fundamental drivers of growth. The bigger question is why is it slowing? And credit data would suggest that companies and local governments are borrowing ever more amounts of money, even though the economy is growing ever more slowly. And I think that's the biggest concern as we go into 2014.
I was going to ask you about your concern on that very aspect, the worry about the amount of money that's being borrowed, risky debt. A lot of big investment banks around the world have warned about China this year. What's your view?
Well, the current talk is will there or won't there be a Lehman-type crisis in China? The government has an extraordinary amount of firepower to counter anything like that. The fact is that the economy is borrowing too much to grow too slowly, and the government needs to sort it out, and the government realizes it needs to sort it out. The problem with that is that lower volumes of credit imply a lower rate of growth, and is that going to be tolerated when the government needs to produce the jobs that it says it wants to?
All right, David Wilder, we appreciate your analysis from Beijing, from Market News International. I'll show you how the markets are reacting to that story in a few minutes, but let's squeeze in some other business headlines. Deutsche Bank's reported a surprise loss for the fourth quarter of 2013 after releasing its latest results earlier than expected. Overall, Deutsche said it posted a pre-tax loss of just over €1 billion for the final quarter of last year. In dollars, that's $1.5 billion. The bank said that litigation costs and restructuring weighed heavily on its financial performance. The legal bills mounted up to €528 million for the period, while revenues fell 16%. We'll see how shares in Deutsche react to this news in a few hours when trading begins in Germany. Shares of Japan's Nintendo plunged 18% in Tokyo after the open today. That was after the gaming giant warned it would swing back into the red. The news comes as Nintendo slashed its global sales forecast for its flagship Wii U game console from 9 million units to 2.8 million. The company also scaled back its expectations for its 3DS portable game console from 18 million to 13.5 million users. However, Nintendo President Satoru Iwata claimed that there are no short-term plans to reshuffle management. Now, female graduates are not asking for the going rate salary compared to their male counterparts setting out at the beginning of their career. GraduateJobs.com measured results over a 10-year period and found that female graduates request lower starting salaries than their male counterparts. And the difference between the two is £1,438. Well, to talk us through this is Jerry Wyatt, Operations Director at GraduateJobs.com. So you found this out. How did you come to that conclusion? How did you measure what people were asking for when they started a new job?
Well, every graduate that visits our site and registers to use our service, we ask them, what would you intend your starting salary to be? Well, we've done that over 10 years to over 500,000 graduates who have entered the workplace. What we've found is that that level, the salary difference between males and females over 10 years has been relatively consistent. So women on average, request a salary that's about £1,000 less than their male counterparts. In and around 2011, that gap widened to about £1,438.
Is it also true to say, though, that in a lot of graduate jobs, the salary is kind of fixed? It's later on in your career when you can start to negotiate and say what you wish to earn. Is that not the case?
Yeah, absolutely. For entry level roles, that salary is fixed. This is purely a question on what would you expect to be paid in your entry level job.
Why do you think the difference is still there, and in fact in the last 3 years getting wider?
Well, I mean, we think there are a few reasons. One potentially is that the industries that female graduates tend to gravitate towards, things like media, advertising, marketing, those type of roles. Potentially in the downturn that we experienced a few years ago, those industries may have been particularly hard hit. So their salaries may have come down, and women may have sort of reflected their expectations differently. That could be one reason. You know, hopefully we're in a sort of a period of recovery, so that gap may start closing. There is also potentially there's been a raft of research about the gender pay divide over the last few years. So it may be that females are responding to the fact that there does appear to be a salary divide, and then setting their salaries, their salary expectations accordingly.
We'll keep an eye on that. Thank you very much, Jerry Wyatt, with that trend. Not necessarily the best of trends. Let's have a quick look at the markets now so you have a sense of where things are at. A lot of that, I have to say, the negativity is to do with what we've mentioned already, the news from China about the slowing growth in the world's number 2 economy. Of course, that has a big impact very quickly, the currencies, so you can see how they're trading. The yen, always of interest at this time. I'll see you soon as we look through the papers.
Thanks for Sally for that. Now, a new action plan to improve standards of mental health treatment will be launched by the government later. The Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, has set out 25 areas where changes are needed and says that mental health should have an equal priority with physical health. Michael Buchanan has more.
At a hospital in Kent, Nick Clegg hears from patients some of the problems they face in accessing proper mental health care.
But you're basically walking around on the ward with your suitcases, sort of on the ward but homeless.
Such a lack of hospital beds, as well as cuts to funding for mental health trusts, mean that staff often struggle to provide decent care. It's a situation, says the Deputy Prime Minister, that's completely unacceptable.
There are just too many parts of the country which have suffered for too long by commissioners in the NHS not providing the mental health services with the same support as they have other parts of the NHS. It is just plain wrong to treat mental health as the poor cousin to physical health in the NHS.
Nick Clegg will launch the government's mental health plan today, including increased support for young people. He's also keen that psychiatric illnesses come out of the shadows, as he puts it, and people feel comfortable talking about their problems. Former Labour spin doctor Alistair Campbell has spoken frankly about his struggles with depression, but says such openness remains a challenge for many others.
I think stigma and discrimination is something that just developed, frankly, over centuries, and it's going to take a bit of time and a lot of campaigning and a lot of changing of public attitudes to get that to break down.
Making physical and mental health equal within the NHS is the government's goal, but ministers recognise that achieving it won't happen quickly. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
Coming up at 6 o'clock on Breakfast, Bill Turnbull and Louise Minchin will have all the day's news, business and sport. They're going to have more on Nick Clegg's plans that we've just been hearing about. They have an interview with him just after 7 o'clock. That's on Breakfast. Hello, you're watching BBC World News. I'm Naga Manchetti. Here are the top stories. The President of Ukraine is to convene a special cross-party commission to try to resolve weeks of political crisis. The announcement follows a day of clashes in Kiev as riot police confronted anti-government protesters. One of Syria's main opposition groups says it's pulling out of peace talks unless the UN retracts its invitation to Iran. Beth McLeod says that some countries only want Iran to attend under certain conditions.
The United States has really been opposed to Iran attending, and the State Department has just said that it wants Iran to publicly accept that the aim for this conference is to find a transitional political body for Syria. Otherwise, its invitation to attend the talks should be withdrawn by the UN.
The EU and United States will suspend some of their sanctions on Iran in a few hours if a UN nuclear watchdog confirms it's reduced its uranium enrichment, or the move is part of a deal to curb Tehran's nuclear program. And at least 4 people have been killed in Pakistan by a suicide bomber in the city of Rawalpindi near Islamabad. The blast hit a crowded market near the Army's national headquarters, one of the most secure areas of the city. It's time for Sally and I to take a look at which stories are making headlines around the world. Let's begin with the Financial Times. It's reporting on the ongoing protests in Ukraine. The latest spark, or new anti-protest legislation, which the newspaper says has produced some of the most violent scenes since the protests began.
The temporary lifting of some sanctions against Iran makes the front page of today's Wall Street Journal. It says that many companies will start looking to do business with Tehran.
Britain's Guardian covers the last-ditch attempt by a group of tech giants to derail plans to close down international tax loopholes. Some of Silicon Valley's biggest companies, including Google and Amazon, have been fighting the changes.
Gulf News reports on China's condemnation of a new US spending bill. The bill was passed into law last week. It limits the amount of tech purchases from China over fears of cyber espionage.
And good news for those of us in Britain who like a bit of sunshine. The Daily Telegraph is highlighting the end of soggy summers. There's a change in ocean currents. It could, and I stress the word could, bring sunnier climes to our shores. I tell you who'll be happy about that is Jonathan Charles.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, you'll believe it. He holidays in the UK, so fingers crossed for your British holidays. Anyway, Director of Communications for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
Nagab Sal, very good to see you as ever. Yeah.
This is an area, the Financial Times covering the protests in Kiev, in Ukraine. This is an area you are very familiar with.
This is clearly a very important moment for Ukraine. I mean, if you look at the Financial Times, they say the upsurge of violence there has taken the protests to a new level, and I've spent a lot of time in Kiev over the last few months. It's very clear that now the country has to reach some political accommodation. But beyond that, it needs to move forward on the economy. I mean, the EBRD is the biggest single foreign investor in Ukraine. We know the country very well. We've just produced a transition report which talks about countries being stuck in transition, countries that have not really progressed the way they should have done over the past 20 years. Ukraine is one of those. It needs to improve its business climate, but it can't do that until it gets over these political problems. But if it doesn't improve the business climate, if it doesn't get investment in, and investors have not been keen to put their money into Ukraine, it's going to find it very difficult to move forward in the years ahead. So there's a political issue first and an economic one.
Now, talking of political issues and economic issues, let's discuss Iran, because the Wall Street Journal looks at the fact that Iran looks to lift trade with the West. Of course, it's about energy to a great degree. It's about oil. And of course, this in the headlines on the day that Iran is causing a stir because of its invitation to be involved in talks about Syria.
This is a really interesting story, Sal, and you've seen the Iranians really making a lot of effort as well. The Iranian president will be in Davos this week, wooing the international business community. But if you're in the oil or gas industry, you've really got to have very strong nerves right now if you're going to do business with Iran. Things look good at the moment. There's this 6-month breathing space, an attempt really to move things on and to hope there's progress on the nuclear deal. But if you sign a contract now and that breathing space runs out, that there's no progress on nuclear weapons in 6 months' time or on the nuclear industry, then that will be very difficult, because you will then be stuck perhaps again in a sanctions regime.
Is Iran doing enough, do you think, to placate the West, to placate the US and the West?
I think there are elements in Iranian society, and I used to spend a lot of time in Iran, that really want this deal to work. The question is whether internally they have the upper hand, and we don't know that. It will be interesting to see whether the hardliners in the end get their way and say we don't want to give away too much, or whether the moderates say we really have to do this. This is in long-term economic interest. And I think it's going to take a few months to see how that plays out.
Now, The Guardian looks at tech firms making last-minute bid to halt tax clampdown. And there's a picture of Margaret Hodge on there because she chairs the Public Accounts Committee here in the UK and has been pretty determined to make sure that the likes of Apple and Google and Amazon pay the tax that she feels they should pay. She's been on this programme talking about it. Tell us what you think about this story.
Well, I mean, this story is about companies which use tax havens, in effect, or international areas where they can minimise the amount of taxation they make. Now, this is about tax efficiency for big companies like Google, Amazon and Apple. They're not trying to avoid tax, they're just trying to run their business as efficiently as possible.
And they're a global business.
And they're
that's
global
their
businesses. And we see it here where they can go to Luxembourg or places like that and run Ireland and run in low-cost, low-tax regimes. The difficulty is the international community is certainly, we've seen it all the time, increasing the pressure wanting to deal with this because countries have seen their tax bases eroded over the past few years in the economic crisis. And what they really want now is to try and get as much money in as possible. So I think the pressure will continue and companies will continue to be under pressure.
Can we have a quick word on the US spending bill?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting story in the Gulf news, and that is that under the US spending bill, it'll be very difficult or more difficult to have technology purchases from China. So if you're a Chinese company trying to sell into America, that is going to be quite difficult because they worry that some of the big Chinese companies, the high-tech companies like Huawei, are actually connected to the Chinese military and could be involved in cyber spying. So they want to stop that, but I think that's going to be quite tough. After all, there is free trade.
We've been remembering our colleague Komla
Yes.
Dumor today, who died suddenly on Friday. Now, Jonathan, when I and Komla Dumor took over from the programme, you spent a lot of time with us, telling us how it is in the morning, how to prepare to work with Sally.
Exactly. It's a big challenge working with you.
Tell us your thoughts.
Well, you know, I was very shocked, as everyone was, when I heard about Komla's sudden death. 3 years ago, when I left the BBC to go to the EBRD, I met you and Komla, and you were taking over this programme from me. And I immediately knew it was going to be in good hands. With Komla, when he smiled, it was like being embraced in some massive bear hug. This very warm individual, just what you need for the early mornings. But I realised very quickly he had that journalistic skill. He had curiosity. Every journalist needs curiosity, and as a result, of course, that made him a very good journalist. He was interested in everybody and everything, and he brought his passion for life to his job.
Also as well, and he had a real sense of style, and he had us all in stitches in the studio. He could do quite a few very good impressions.
Including me, actually, I have to say. I did once catch him doing an impression of me with that big, he had a big booming voice, and to see that big laugh was unbelievable. You could only smile when you saw Komla.
Jonathan, thank you. We're remembering Komla fondly. We are ending today's programme remembering Komla Dumor, world-class journalist, husband, father and friend.
You're watching BBC World News. My name is Komla Dumor.
And so for me, the most important thing is to know what I'm talking about, to know the stories. And if there's a cool factor, I mean, it doesn't hurt, does it?
My grandfather wrote Ghana's national anthem. However, my mother tells me, she's gone now, but Mommy tells me that there was a day they were in a shop called Leventis. I don't think that still works anymore. Yeah. And Grandpa was singing another song. And she asked him, Daddy, what's this song for? And he said, oh, I'm writing a song for Nigeria when they become independent. The point he was making is that these borders and these nationalities and these things that we hold so closely are slowly beginning to become less and less important.
It's very hard, I think, for anybody to experience to see a loved one, you know, slowly
go through the pain.
Yeah.
How's that look? No? And on Tuesday, full coverage from the palace to the church to the streets of Amsterdam.
Kickoff is just a few hours from now, and you know what? I do work for the BBC, but it's time for me to show my true colors. If I can hand this over.
And that's the latest BBC News. I'm Komla Dumor. Thank you, thank you.
Hello there. You can probably guess by the look of this ball behind me that we are expecting quite a bit of frost overnight tonight. So for the morning, it is going to be there. It'll be a cold start to the day. There'll also be a fair bit of fog around as well. So something to bear in mind if you're going to be travelling. Could even see some icy surfaces across parts of Scotland where we've had some showers keeping going through the night. And indeed, there will be 1 or 2 showers across many western and southern coasts. But for most of us, it'll be a dry start to the day. So there will be some fog around, particularly affecting East Wales there. Do bear that in mind. Parts of Northern Ireland also seeing a few patches of fog, but also just 1 or 2 showers. A cold start to the day, as I mentioned, quite frosty, and there could be some icy surfaces across some parts of Scotland. It'll be a dry start to the day, though, for most of us, but we will have some fairly extensive fog across parts of North East England, particularly through the Vale of York. A particular spot there for seeing fog, of course, down into the Trent Valley as well, and some of that could linger on into the afternoon. Across East Anglia, it'll be a cold and frosty start. There could be some brightness around the southeast, but some patches of fog turning up almost anywhere, really, across the south. 1 or 2 showers there for the southwest, but for most of us, as I said, it will be a dry start to the day. Now, that fog will be fairly extensive, but hopefully it'll start to lift away as the day goes on. 1 or 2 spots will hold on to some of that fog all day, perhaps through the Vale of York or the Trent Valley maybe, so that will have a knock-on effect on the temperatures. But for most of us, we'll get some brightness coming through, maybe a few sunny spells, and temperatures should reach around 7 or 8 degrees, although even that may feel a little bit chillier than we've been used to. Now, through the rest of Monday, we'll see the clear skies persisting, and that will allow the mist and fog to reform through the night. So it'll be more extensive, I think, on Tuesday morning even than Monday morning. A real hazard, I think, if you are going to be taking to the roads. A change out towards the west, though, through the early hours of Tuesday, because here a weather front will move in, and this will bring some wet and windy weather with it. So fog won't be a problem here, and perhaps not even frost either, whereas elsewhere under those clear skies, we will see temperatures dropping below freezing once again. So a cold and foggy start once again in central and eastern areas on Tuesday. Eventually that lifting, perhaps some brightness coming through for a time, but this weather front will continue to move in from the west. It'll hang around for some time, I think, even as we go through Tuesday night into Wednesday. It's still affecting some eastern areas, so that will give some rain here through the first part of Wednesday. And with low pressure still in charge, we won't be immune from a few showers almost anywhere. So it's looking fairly unsettled once again as we look towards the middle of the week. But in the short term, at least, it's the fog and frost to bear in mind.
How is your NHS hospital coping this winter?
As part of the NHS Winter Project, we're launching a new website.
It will give you access to all the stats for every single major A&E in England. All you have to do is log on to the website and enter your postcode.
Each week we'll be crunching the data to keep you informed. But we want to hear about your experiences too, wherever you are in the UK. Join us for a weekly update this Friday here on BBC News.
Discover more from BBC Radio 4 on your mobile, tablet or computer. Delve into programmes about our world, cutting-edge comedies, and every desert island discs ever. In fact, there are over 25,000 programmes available all at the touch of a button. So, what will you choose? For more Radio 4, go online or download the BBC iPlayer radio app.
Every day at 5. The big news, the big names, the big picture. 60 minutes, all you need to know about the day's events. Questioning the people making the headlines. Bringing you the news that matters. Join us every weekday for BBC News at 5.
As the Queen's baton continues to make its way towards Glasgow's Commonwealth Games, Mark Beaumont finds himself on his marks in Newey.
Disaster.
On the ball in the Norfolk Island.
Do you think I'm ready for a bit of competition?
Why not? Yeah, we'll have a game.
And on the ropes in Tonga.
Coach been packing now.
Yeah, he's moving too fast.
The Queen's Baton Relay. Welcome to the Commonwealth. Sunday morning at 10:30 on BBC News.